Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Forward Thinking Podcast. It's Christy and Charlie here. And on today's episode, we're talking about, it might be a hot take, but we're chatting through our industry funnel benchmarks pointless. So to kick it off, I want to talk through, the type of benchmarks we're talking about today are funnel benchmarks. So tracking the life cycle stage conversions. And we measure this in three ways through the 3 V's, which is volume, velocity, and conversion. We want to chat through, are using industry benchmarks helpful? We get this question a lot from clients, and they love asking us, what are the benchmarks, especially for our industry? And it can be a very specific industry. And so we want to talk through today does it even make sense to use them? So Charlie, what do you think? Are they pointless?
I think if I had a gun to my head, I'd say yes. Obviously there's a lot of nuance to that, but if I had to choose whether you use them or not, I would probably not use them. Mm-hmm. And really, in my mind, there's two reasons. The first one is that there's just too many variables and differences between companies, right? The way their sales team is structured, the way their marketing team is structured, even down to the definitions of stages isn't always aligned across companies. And I know when you go to these analysts, you try and get them to work on benchmarking you versus other companies. They will try to align stages, but every time we've done, I've had clients, we haven't got clients to do that, but they've gone to one of those big analysts. It's been such an effort to align the stages, and you just end up being well, but what the analyst is saying, this stage to this stage, it's kind of like a different definition for this company. Then there's other things like how long have you had that funnel like that, because you might have just changed to that funnel and those stages, and then in the past you used different ones, so maybe it hasn't had time to have enough volume go through that funnel to be able to get accurate data on it. And then there's just too many differences. And then the fact you could be, obviously if you're looking at an MQL to SQL type conversion rate, companies are tweaking and refining that all the time. So what do you use? Do you use just this month, or do you use the last year? Are there other companies that are providing data to these benchmarks using the same time frames? Are there differences in seasonality? So it's just it's just too much, right? There's too many variables, and you can't control the variables, so you can't really do a scientific assessment and just be okay, this is what the benchmark should be. And I'm not, and really everything I just talked about there isn't even talking about the differences between companies, right? Yes, you might be B2B SaaS, but there's still differences in your sales cycle length. There's still differences in the industries you're targeting. There's still differences in maybe your ACV. There's just a lot of variables, and it's just very hard to just say, okay, this is what you should be shooting for.
Totally. And I think if you even look at top of the funnel, it could even be down to what type of marketing are you doing? Are you just putting a bunch of cold leads into your database, or are you really running an inbound kind of methodology where you're using campaigns to bring people through the door? That'll impact your conversion rate to MQL, massively. Or like you said, do you have a SDR team, or have you had turnover there? And that plays a big role into your MQL to SQL conversion. But all things considered, like you said, it's just so unique, and an industry being the same is not an identifier. It doesn't make you twins. There's no things that will act exactly the same, especially not a business, and the life cycle, because it's so arbitrary for what the definitions are, and it changes. It's just so hard to compare. Totally agree.
And then, so even if you then take that out of the equation, right? So imagine if you were able to find, you were able to control all the variables and then really have an accurate comparison. I think that's almost impossible, but imagine if you were, right? Now, I still don't see a ton of value in knowing kind of what those other companies are doing, right? Yes, you might be able to get a sense of what's best practice, what's best in class versus what's not. But a lot of times when you look at benchmarks, and this is kind of maybe just a fundamental flaw in like how human beings are wired. It's like, if you see, okay, like this is the best in class, like say, I don't know, throw a number out there, MQL to SQL, like 67 or 70%.
60%, yeah.
Now, that if you're like anywhere close to that, I guarantee like a lot of companies are nowhere near that. But if you are anywhere close to that, it's kind of like, oh, job done. That's good, right? and so therefore, you know, we talk about this a lot, and I always have to credit Alison on our team with the way that she articulates this. You know, a lot of times, and she talks about it a lot with attribution data, but it applies here. You know, when you use data and when you use analytics, when you're building reports, you shouldn't only be trying to prove marketing is working. You should be trying to improve. So therefore, applying that to this, if you have a benchmark and you're anywhere close to it, the job isn't to be like, oh, send that to my CMO, or the CMO share that with the board and say like, we're close to industry benchmarks. Good, job done. That's just proving marketing is working. Really, when you're looking at the 3 V's, so again, that's volume, velocity, and conversion, the 3 primary metrics when you're trying to evaluate your funnel, you want to be using those data points to then drive change and improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your funnel and improve all of those metrics. So like if you see, and it doesn't even matter what the number is, right? You could have a 3% conversion rate from MQL to SQL, and there could still be ways to improve that. You could have an 80% MQL to SQL, and there would still be ways to improve that.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it doesn't particularly matter what your benchmark is. Like creating your own benchmark is fine. Like put a line in the sand and say, this is what it is. And then have a plan and try and figure out how to improve that. Because in an ideal world, you would have 100% conversion rates all through the funnel, super low time between the funnel. So the velocity of fast and high volume, right?
Yeah.
So, but obviously that's not going to be the case, but you should always be trying to improve, because every drop off or in conversion rate, every extra day on the time between stages, that's just less efficiency through your funnel and time wasted, resources wasted. So really the goal should always be to look at the trends and trying to make all of those trends improve, as opposed to just benchmarking and saying like, okay, we're close to the benchmark, or that's all we're going to try and get to.
Totally. And I think one thing too, to be mindful for marketers, I think sometimes we get caught up in like a group think mentality too. Like I love all the communities that are out there right now, and people, sharing ideas and stuff like that. But I'll often see questions asking for benchmarks, or what are you seeing in this? And I think that that's okay. But I think marketers, you need to think, comparison isn't always the best thing. There's so many other things that play there. And like you said, focusing on improving your own metrics internally, I think is the right place to look first. That applies to everything. Like just because a marketing channel works for another marketer or another company doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So
yeah. Totally. And on that point, I think a lot of the times you see it's probably the marketing ops person asking other people, probably because their boss or their boss's boss has been like, oh, they went to the exec staff meeting and they were like, these are our conversion rates. And maybe other people were like, well, is that any good or not? And then your CMO is like, obviously we talked about this, I think on the podcast the other day, like the tenure of a CMO is like so short.
Yeah.
They're under so much pressure. They probably are like, I have to prove that we're good somehow. And then they push that down to the lower teams to like try and find benchmarks. And sometimes they can even be pushing that on the teams, like find benchmarks that make us look good. you know? And it all goes back into the whole proving marketing is working. And I understand sometimes businesses are like, just the foundation and the structure of that business is built on and putting pressure on the marketing team to prove their worth. That is a very difficult situation to be in. So sometimes you do have to just like fall in line and like try and prove. But then there's an educational piece about, okay, once you've got over that hurdle, let's try and really focusing on improving, looking at trends, making sure that we're really analyzing the data in a way that's going to help us be better, not just kind of like rubber stamp, like marketing is okay,
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
But we understand the pressures put on people. So we're not critiquing anyone if like you're the person trying to find these benchmarks because you've been asked to. I think there's just like a wider knowledge that needs to get out there around like whether these are actually useful or not.
Yeah. And I think to end it, like it like with everything we've been talking about when it comes to reporting and data, like there's also like using common sense, if the best like, time to run a mile, like is, 5-6 minutes, but be realistic. Like, what's a good time for you? That's the same way to think about this. Like for your company, best in class might be 60%, but all the variables that you're working with that are uncontrollable. What's bad, like a 1% conversion rate from lead to MQL is not good. But what could be impacting that? Do you have a load of like just cold leads, or, are there things at play? And so the focus there would be like, you kind of know what's not great, or you could see things dip, and that's a sign that maybe things are changing, so all these things are just like, how can you just continually improve, like you said, and you kind of know what's not good, you just use your noggin a bit.
Yeah. And one way to try and get that education around the org is, try and first, benchmark yourself against yourself, right? Draw a line in the sand. What are the metrics? Then identify kind of like where you see inefficiencies. So when we say like 60% MQL to SQL, that's probably like 60 times higher than some companies, right? Like you've definitely seen companies where the MQL basically everything, therefore the MQL to opportunity is like 1%.
Yeah.
So if that's you, you don't need an industry benchmark to tell you there's a lot of inefficiency there, because that means 99% of the leads that you're sending to sales aren't resulting in anything. Therefore, 99% of the time sales is spending on marketing leads is wasted. Therefore, what do? Okay, well, let's try and tighten our MQL model and then see how that impacts conversion rates. Let's see if that actually gets some feedback from the SDRs to see if like, qualitative feedback, like, are you actually like seeing, better leads, and only those leads are you having more time to be able to spend on higher quality leads, because you're not just like always having to deal with the next thing. And then like build that picture and then test your hypothesis, work different things into your funnel, and then over time track the trend, right?
Yeah.
Because like a benchmark is like a static number. It's like, this is the benchmark and this is your number. But really, trend analysis is a lot better at really identifying like if what you're doing is working and getting better, because you can show improvement. So once you can prove to the business, okay, we made these changes and then this is the improvement when you look at the trend, then that should be able to educate people to be able to be like, get into that improvement mindset, not just like, okay, just we need to figure out a bench, like the industry benchmark, and try and align to that. And then you just like constantly improve. And that's like building a revenue engine is all about that, right? You're just trying to just like tune the engine constantly and make it just constantly improve, so you can have a predictable business, predictable revenue model, that the business, especially in a SaaS business where you're able to like really show that the business is able to grow and you're able to support the growth ambitions of the business.
Totally. 100%. So would love to hear what everyone else has to think about this. Do you find industry benchmarks for your funnel useful? If so, at us on LinkedIn. But hopefully that got you thinking about it, and really thinking about how you can instead instill more of a improvement mindset, and do some trend analysis and look inward, because comparison's the thief of all joy. I say that a lot, but if you're just constantly looking at like what others are doing or what others are telling you should be, you're kind of going to lose sight on making the changes that you need to do to actually get there. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the episode of Forward Thinking. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with your colleagues and friends. We're on all of the major podcast players. So thank you so much. Have a great day.